Hey everyone, I'm Erin Hardick. I'm here for a new Zpryme Now with Sam Sargent, the Deputy Chief of Staff at Cap Metro here in Austin, Texas. Thank you for joining me today, Sam.
Thank you, Erin.
So, can you kind of give us a little bit of a status update? What's going on at Cap Metro? How have things been over the past few weeks?
Sure. Yeah, I think like it has been for any other person or business or you name it, it has been hectic. It's required people to take on a lot of new roles and to learn new things about their teams, about themselves. But I think that we did a really good job of responding to the health crisis and to the economic crisis that came after that. And we are now in recovery mode. So we are really turning a corner. We expect to be back onto a lot of our, for instance, regular schedules. Our fare systems will be back up and running on June 1st. And we've also installed a lot of different devices, added new protocols, new PPE to make sure that customers, staff, and operators are all safe out there in the field. And moving forward, I think that we are beginning to get back into the swing of things for our long-term vision. And that has a lot to do just with the recovery of reputation for transit generally, and to build on, I think, the good reputation that we've gotten for being so responsive and really reacting the right way to this crisis, so that we can move into 2020 and keep on going strong.
Yeah, so I'm excited to hear about that long-term vision, but let's backtrack a little bit
Sure.
and talk about what the vision was kind of at the end of 2019 and going into 2020. And I think by giving us an understanding of what that vision was then we can talk about how the pandemic may have affected it and changed it for the longer term. So let's start with, what did you guys envision the future of, transportation, Cap Metro at the end of 2019 and really at the beginning of this year?
Yeah, so at the end of 2019, early part of 2020, we had been riding what wound up being a 17 straight months of ridership growth on the bus and the rail, which bucks almost all industry trends for public transportation. So we were riding pretty high on the amount of people who were either moving to Austin and realizing that we were a good option, or were just beginning to build their lives around transit. And obviously, with everybody needing to stay home and so many folks teleworking, that's changed a bit. On the long-term vision at the end of last year, beginning of this year, we were looking after multiple meetings with our board, city council, almost 40,000 local residents who'd been engaged at a brand new system of high capacity transit. And Austin's taken a couple of shots at this in 2000 and 2014 to build out a light rail system to complement our existing bus and commuter rail lines. So we were looking at 2 light rail lines, multiple high capacity bus lines, and a number of on-demand neighborhood circulators and things like that. Now that we have gotten through, I hope, this pandemic, I can say that the plan, the map that you would see for Project Connect has not changed significantly. This has been the result of 4 or 5 years worth of planning. It's going through a very, I would say, rigid, in a good way, federal process. So there was not that much that was going to change on the map, but a lot is changing on how we talk about transit and how we sell transit and how we make people feel comfortable about that experience. So I think that's the biggest change is how we talk about it, that maybe we need to take a couple of steps back from where we had been and really talk about why transit is safe and why this investment makes sense. But the map still looks the same by and large. Most of the modes, light rail, on-demand vehicles, bus, remain the same.
Yeah, so what's the messages that you're going to kind of focus on when you're trying to educate people around, transit, why it is safe? Because I don't think it's, unreasonable to assume that a lot of people are going to be scared to get on a public bus, and what that means and how it's interacting with other people. So how are you guys going to approach kind of communicating that message?
I think we find ourselves in much the same place that an owner of a restaurant or a commercial realtor, for instance, who's wanting to sell office space, or a theater or a music venue, or an airline, for instance. We need to be delicate, and we need to understand that everybody, and this may be the first time that we've really had this kind of collective, I'll call it a trauma, where we've all experienced the same kinds of fears, some of them financial, some of them about your health. And so we do need to approach it really delicately. And so I think that a lot of what we've done in the short term, ranging from making sure that there's masks and gloves available to everybody, to doing far deeper cleaning than we've already done of our vehicles. We've added just a number of different physical things that should make people feel like they can maintain proper distance, that they feel safe when they're on the vehicle itself. So that's step one. But I think step two is that as people begin coming back to work, is reminding them, and it will be abundantly clear, I think, in any city, whether it's in Austin, where you and I are, Erin, or anywhere else, traffic will be back. And maybe there will be some changes, because unfortunately some people may not have a job, and many people may be teleworking for a while. But the basics of why transit works in an urban environment simply won't have changed. There's not really that much that technology can do to make people fit more efficiently into certain spaces, or to make a highway hold more vehicles. So we still have that geometry problem. And I think at the end of the day, that's what people will understand, and that's why the investment will still make sense. And in fact, the long-term vision plan for transportation that the city of Austin has put together, and this is probably true in most cities, it's always thought that there would be a big increase in teleworking, along with a big increase in public transportation use. So I don't see them as being in competition. Maybe they are in a couple of markets. I do think a lot will change about how we move, but it's incumbent upon transit providers like Capital Metro, make sure people feel safe with the experience, and then just reiterate what the problem was all along. We just need to move people more efficiently so that we can have a more sustainable, more equitable, more mobile future. So I think that argument still holds, but I know that it's going to take a bit for us to all ease back into whatever the new normal looks like.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to ask you about microtrains. We had actually been seeing disruptions in how people moved really over the past, I guess, year, 2 years. Austin in particular, one of the cities hit really heavily with scooters, and there's scooters there. That's just one example of how individuals are moving about cities different ways. How do you see some of those more individual forms of transit, whether it's scooters or e-bikes, or even ride sharing, where you just have one person, two people in a car? How do you see those aspects of people moving coming together with mass transit?
Yeah, I think that micromobility is really complementary and always has been to transit. I've never thought that it is a threat to mass transit. I remember hearing from people when we first saw the explosion of scooters in Austin, and it was no different than when Uber and Lyft first came on the scene, which is kind of funny because it wasn't that long ago. People said, well, this must be really impacting transit. And well, no, the market is different. The types of trips are different. But that is very especially true with micromobility. So dockless bikes, e-bikes, scooters, whatever it may be. More often than not, we've seen through the data that's been shared with us by some of those providers, we see big upticks around major transit hubs. And so I think it's complementary. It's great first mile, last mile. I do think that the market is going to demand quite a bit of that, because it's not in a confined space, at least during summer and fall and things like that. Rideshare may be a little bit different, because that's still a pretty intimate experience. It's either one-on-one, or it's still not really in any less tight of a space than you usually are spaced out on a bus or a train. So that may still have some of that easing back in that public transit's going to have to do. And whether or not a lot of those drivers and providers are able to do some of the precautions that public transit is putting into place is questionable, I think. But on the dockless bikes, for instance, we have been working with B-Cycle here in Austin to almost fully integrate them into Capital Metro's range of modes. So we see it as being very complementary. I do think there will be a big uptick in it because people may want to move on their own, and people may just be making different trips, especially folks who are teleworking. It may be that since your universe got a little bit smaller, that you'll take an e-bike to go grab lunch and get out of the house. So it's going to be interesting, but I do think that it's all going to be very complementary.
I think what you mean with ride sharing having more of that uncertainty. I've already seen people out on scooters and bikes, but I don't think I know anyone who's taken or used rideshare quite yet. So I've been seeing people, ease into some forms of micromobility. Rideshare hasn't been one. So it'll be interesting to see, when that ticks back up and how that experience looks if it does change.
Yeah, and it may just be different markets, but I had seen numbers as high as 80 and 90% down on ridership for some of the rideshare providers, and this would be nationally. And Capital Metro, for instance, we saw about a 61% decline in ridership during this COVID period, which is about on average for a lot of transit providers. And we saw a bigger decline for our one-on-one paratransit service, so for folks with disabilities. And I do think a lot of that has to do with the perception of being in one space with one person. So it's very interesting, and it's going to take us a bit to ease out of that fear and feel comfortable again.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, Project Connect, the main strategies, kind of the main goal is still there, and you have, an idea of what you're working towards. It seems like that would always be helpful in a time that's so, weighted with uncertainty. So I, wish you guys the best of luck. I know you have a lot of work ahead of you, so I appreciate your time talking with me today, and really excited to see how Austin kind of emerges from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a lot in the works. It is an uncertain time, but at the same time, I think a lot of good can come from all of this. So thank you very much, Erin, for having me.
Of course.